Welcome back, dear friend. I've kept the kettle warm just for you. Sit down, rest your hands, and let the scent of cinnamon and tea fill the air. Tonight's tale will be gentle and sweet at first, but as the night deepens, so too will the mystery that lies beneath it. Let's begin our story together. The first light of dawn spilled through the small round window, painting the wooden floor in soft streaks of gold. A faint creak came from the old beams overhead, as if the house itself was waking up. In the stillness, a low, comforting hum drifted through the warm air, wrapping the quiet kitchen in song. It was the sound of Lila beginning her day, steady and familiar, like the heartbeat of the little village beyond her door. Lila tied her apron with practiced ease, the faded cotton soft beneath her fingers. She stretched her arms, loosening the sleep from her body, and glanced around her cozy kitchen with a fond smile. Wooden counters gleamed faintly in the morning light, polished smooth from years of kneading and rolling. Bundles of dried thyme and rosemary dangled from a narrow beam above her head, releasing a delicate, earthy perfume whenever the breeze slipped through the open window. The air was warm, filled with the mingled scents of cinnamon and vanilla, lingering from last night's baking, and beneath it all, the deeper, richer smell of rising dough filled the room, promising comfort to anyone who stepped inside. Her cat, a small gray creature with bright green eyes, wove gracefully around her ankles, its fur brushing softly against her legs. Lila chuckled under her breath and bent down to scratch the cat behind its ears, whispering, "Good morning, Pip. Ready to keep me company today?" The cat purred in response, a low rumble like distant thunder, before hopping onto a low stool near the hearth to watch her work. Lila's hands sank into the soft, pliant dough waiting on the counter, and she began to knead, her palms pressing and folding in a steady rhythm. The dough was warm, almost alive beneath her touch, and she marveled at how a simple mixture of flour, water, and yeast could hold such promise. As she worked, her humming grew louder, blending with the faint crackle of the fire and the sleepy chorus of birds outside the window. This was her favorite part of the day, the quiet moment before the village truly awoke, when it felt like the world belonged only to her and her kitchen. Her mind wandered as her hands moved, thinking of the people who would soon gather at her little bakery. She pictured Mrs. Alder, who always asked for the softest rolls for her grandchildren, and old Mr. Brooke, who claimed her honey bread tasted just like his late wife's. These thoughts warmed her, wrapping around her heart like a thick quilt. Baking wasn't just work, it was her way of caring for others, of stitching the village together, one loaf at a time. Yet beneath the peace of the morning, a strange flutter stirred in her chest. Faint and quick, it wasn't unease exactly, more like the hush before rain, or the pause between heartbeats. She shook it off with a soft laugh, telling herself it was only her imagination. Still, her eyes drifted to the door for a moment longer than usual, as though expecting someone. Though no one was there, with a final firm press, she shaped the dough into neat rounds and set them carefully aside to rise. She wiped her hands on her apron and leaned against the counter, letting her gaze sweep over the sunlit kitchen. The room glowed softly, warm and familiar. Yet something about the day felt quietly different, as if the air was holding its breath outside. The first footsteps of villagers stirred on the cobbled street, and inside, Lila smoothed the flour from her palms, ready to greet whatever this new morning might bring. A soft knock echoed through the quiet morning, so faint that at first Lila thought she had imagined it. She paused, her hands dusted with flour, listening closely. The knock came again, followed by the faint rustle of paper slipping against wood. Pip, her gray cat, leaped down from the stool with a curious meow and padded toward the door. Tail flicking, Lila wiped her palms on her apron and moved to follow, her brow furrowing ever so slightly. It was early, far too early for deliveries or visits, and a strange chill curled in her chest as she reached for the latch. When she opened the door, no one was there. The village street lay empty, bathed in the pale, pearly light of dawn. A thin mist clung to the cobblestones, and in the stillness, Lila could hear the distant drip of water from the eaves. Her eyes dropped, and that was when she saw it. A small envelope resting neatly on the doorstep, its edges damp with morning dew. It looked fragile, almost shy, as though it had tiptoed there on its own. Lila bent down, lifting the envelope carefully between her fingers. The paper was thick and smooth, sealed with a deep red wax, stamped with a curling, unfamiliar symbol. She turned it over, frowning. There was no name, no return address, only that single mysterious mark gleaming in the soft light. Pip brushed against her ankles with a questioning purr, and Lila whispered, "Who could have left this? And why?" Her voice sounded hushed in the quiet, as if she might disturb something unseen, carrying it inside. She set the envelope on her wooden counter and hesitated for a moment, heart tapping faster than usual. 1,000 questions bloomed in her mind. Was it from a neighbor with some urgent request? Or perhaps from a traveling merchant she had once helped? Or, she thought, with a faint shiver, from someone she did not know at all. Finally, she broke the seal with her thumb. The wax cracked softly, releasing the faintest hint of spice into the air. So subtle, she wondered if she had imagined it. Inside lay a single sheet of parchment. Folded neatly, Lila unfolded it slowly, her breath catching. The handwriting was unlike anything she had ever seen. Delicate, looping letters that seemed almost alive. As if the ink had been spun by moonlight, she traced the words with her eyes, realizing with surprise that it was a recipe, but not like any recipe she had ever encountered. There were ingredients she recognized: butter and flour, sugar and eggs. But there were others she had never even heard of, strange and shimmering in description. Instructions spoke of stirring until the mixture hums softly and folding the dough with care under a silver moon. Lila's lips parted in astonishment. She had been baking since she was a child at her mother's side, yet nothing in her well-worn cookbooks had ever read like this. "What in the world is this?" she murmured to herself, clutching the paper as if it might vanish. Her mind raced with wonder and unease. Who could have known to send this to her? And why now, on this particular morning? She stood very still, listening to the quiet kitchen, the crackle of the fire, the slow tick of the clock on the shelf. The recipe felt heavy in her hands, filled with both promise and mystery. Setting it down at last, she glanced toward the door once more, half expecting to see a shadow retreating down the lane. There was nothing but mist and silence. With a steadying breath, she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, knowing only one thing for certain. This was no ordinary recipe, and whatever secrets it held, she was meant to uncover them. The morning air carried the sweet promise of the market as Lila stepped outside, the mist lifting slowly to reveal a sky the color of pale honey. Cobblestones gleamed damply under her boots, and the distant chatter of voices floated toward her like the hum of a waking beehive. She adjusted the basket on her arm, the empty weave light against her hip, and started down the winding lane that led to the village square. Pip watched her from the window, tail flicking lazily, as though offering silent company from afar. As she neared the square, the sounds grew clearer. Stall holders called out cheerful greetings, their voices mingling with the clatter of wooden crates and the jingling of coins. Children dashed between the carts, their laughter ringing bright as they chased each other around the fountain. The air was alive with scents. Warm bread and roasted nuts mingled with the sharp tang of citrus, earthy root vegetables, and the sweet perfume of fresh flowers. Lila smiled as she passed familiar faces, exchanging nods and kind words. It felt good to be here, among neighbors who knew her, not just as a baker, but as someone who carried memories of their shared village life. She stopped first at the miller's stall, choosing sacks of golden flour, the grains catching the morning light like flecks of sunlight. Then she gathered fresh butter, eggs nestled carefully in straw, and sprigs of fragrant thyme and lavender, all the ordinary ingredients she would need for her day's baking. Yet the strange recipe from the letter tugged at her mind, its unusual instructions lingering like a whisper she could not shake. She scanned each stall for the rarer items it listed, her heart quickening when she spotted a cluster of pale, unusual berries at the far end of the square. They gleamed softly as though dusted with frost, and she slipped a few into her basket, wondering how they would taste baked into something magical. As she turned from the berry stall, a shadow shifted beside her, a figure cloaked in deep brown, hood drawn low to hide their face, moved silently through the crowd. They came to stand close, so near she could smell the faint, spicy warmth of clove on their clothes. Without a word, the figure reached into a pocket and drew out a small glass vial. Inside, a fine shimmering powder swirled like captured starlight. Lila froze, her fingers tightening around her basket. The figure leaned close, their voice barely more than a breath. "It's the secret you need," they whispered, slipping the vial into her palm before she could respond, and then they were gone, vanishing into the bustle of the market as if swallowed by mist. Lila stared down at the vial, its contents glimmering softly in the sunlight. Wonder and unease tangled in her chest. Why had they chosen her? How did they know about the recipe? She bit her lip, considering whether to call out or run after them. But something deep inside urged her to stay quiet. She tucked the vial carefully into her apron pocket, the glass cool against her skin as she finished gathering the last of her supplies. The market seemed to hum with a strange energy, familiar voices and scents blending with the memory of that whisper. She walked home slowly, basket heavier than when she had left. But it was not just the weight of ingredients she carried now. It was the weight of a mystery, waiting to be solved. By the time her cottage came into view, the mist had burned away, leaving the village bathed in warm sunlight. Lila paused at her doorstep, her heart thudding softly as she touched the hidden vial. Behind her, the market sounds faded to a distant hum, and ahead her kitchen waited, glowing like a promise. The kitchen glowed softly in the early morning light, golden sunbeams spilling through the window and pooling on the wooden table. Lila moved quietly about the room, the gentle creak of floorboards beneath her feet mingling with the steady hum of the oven warming to life. Outside, the village stirred faintly, but here, in her little cottage, there was only the comforting rhythm of preparation, the promise of something wonderful about to unfold. She laid out each ingredient with care: flour, butter, eggs, sugar, and the shimmering vial tucked safely at the edge of the table. The golden flour looked like sifted sunlight, the butter pale and soft, the eggs smooth beneath her fingertips. Lila ran her hand across the wooden surface, grounding herself, whispering a small prayer for guidance. She wanted to do everything exactly as the recipe described, her heart still fluttering with the memory of the mysterious figure from the market. Following the recipe's first steps, she sifted the flour into a large bowl, the fine powder drifting through the air like winter snow. But as it settled, Lila noticed something unusual. The flour swirled on its own, forming delicate spirals as though guided by an invisible hand. Her breath caught, part fear, part awe. She glanced around the empty kitchen, half expecting to see someone standing beside her, but there was only the warm, steady crackle of the oven. Next came the sugar. She poured it slowly, watching the crystals sparkle as if tiny stars had been captured inside them. When she stirred the mixture, a faint tingling spread through her fingers, soft and warm, like dipping her hands into sunlit water. Her pulse quickened. She whispered to herself, just a recipe, just ingredients, yet deep down, she felt it was something more, something alive. As she added butter and eggs, the dough began to form, smooth and golden beneath her hands. Warmth spread from her palms into the mixture, wrapping around her like a gentle embrace. Tiny sparks lifted from the sugar as she mixed, floating upward before dissolving into the air with a soft shimmer. Lila gasped quietly, pressing a hand to her chest. It was beautiful, magical, and just a little frightening. The aroma soon filled the room, rich and sweet, with hints of spice that reminded her of childhood winters by the hearth. She opened the window to let in a breeze, but instead of drifting out, the scent seemed to travel further, curling through the village streets like a beckoning ribbon. Outside, footsteps approached, and soft voices rose in curiosity. A neighbor peeked through the open door, eyes widening. "Lila, what is that smell? It's unlike anything I've ever known," they murmured. Others gathered behind, their faces lit with wonder. Lila smiled nervously, her cheeks flushed. "Just a new recipe," she said softly, though her heart thudded with secrets she could not share. As the dough baked, the kitchen glowed with warmth, both from the oven and from the quiet magic humming in the air. Lila wiped her hands on her apron, leaning against the counter as she watched the golden pastries rise. The neighbors whispered among themselves, their voices hushed as if they too felt the enchantment. When the timer chimed, she lifted the tray carefully, steam curling upward like pale, ghostly ribbons. The pastries shimmered faintly as though holding a secret within their flaky layers. Lila set them on the table, breathing deeply, her thoughts tangled between excitement and unease. Outside, the murmuring crowd fell silent. Waiting, the sunlight shifted, casting warm patterns across the floor. And for a moment, Time seemed to slow. Lila touched the edge of the mysterious vial still on the table, her fingers trembling slightly behind her. The oven clicked softly as it cooled. Ahead lay the taste of magic and mystery, waiting to be discovered. The kitchen door creaked softly as a cool breeze slipped inside, carrying with it the laughter of children playing in the lane. Lila turned from the table, brushing a curl of hair from her cheek, and that was when she saw him, a small figure standing hesitantly in the doorway, wide eyes reflecting the golden glow of the oven. It was little Theo, the baker's youngest son, his cheeks flushed pink from the morning chill. He stepped forward timidly, his worn boots scuffing the wooden floor. His gaze fixed not on Lila, but on the tray of shimmering pastries cooling by the window. His tiny nose twitched as he sniffed the air, mouth slightly open in wonder. "Miss Lila," he whispered, his voice barely louder than the crackle of the fire. "Is it true? Is there magic in your baking?" Lila's heart softened at his words. She knelt so they were eye level, gently taking his small hands in hers. They were cold and a bit sticky from jam. "Perhaps there is, Theo," she said with a wink, "but only the kind that comes when you mix love and flour in just the right way." Theo giggled, covering his mouth, his eyes shining like polished buttons. Curiosity lit his face as he glanced at the bowl of dough on the table. Lila followed his gaze and smiled. "Would you like to help me make a little more?" she asked. His eager nod was all the answer she needed. She fetched a sturdy stool and set it beside her, steadying it carefully as he climbed up, his legs swinging excitedly. Together, they began to knead the soft dough, Lila guiding his small hands with her own. The flour puffed up in tiny clouds with every movement, dusting their hair and noses. Theo laughed so hard he nearly toppled backward, and Lila caught him just in time, her own laughter mingling with his. For a moment, the kitchen felt lighter, filled with the pure joy of play as they worked. Theo's brow furrowed in concentration. "Like this?" he asked, pressing the dough with his palms. Lila nodded. "Just so," she said gently. Then she leaned closer, lowering her voice as if sharing a great secret. "But there's a special trick this recipe never mentions. Would you like to see it?" Theo gasped and nodded furiously. She took a pinch of sugar and sprinkled it over the dough, murmuring the soft words she had read the night before. The air around them seemed to hum faintly, and to Theo's amazement, the dough began to shimmer ever so slightly, a faint golden light dancing across its surface. His mouth fell open in delight. "It's alive," he squealed, clapping his hands together, sending flour flying across the room. "Not alive, Theo," Lila said, chuckling. "Just a little bit of wonder. Now, let's shape it into something special." Theo eagerly rolled and twisted the dough, forming crooked stars and lopsided hearts, each one glowing faintly before settling into stillness. Lila shaped a small bird and held it up for him to see. "This one will fly in our dreams," she whispered, and Theo gasped as though it might take wing right there. The rich, warm scent of baking wrapped around them as they placed their creations into the oven. Theo leaned against Lila's side, humming softly while they waited, his earlier shyness replaced by a deep, contented calm. Lila stroked his hair and felt a swell of affection. It had been so long since her kitchen rang with such innocent laughter. When the pastries were ready, they pulled them out carefully, steam rising like curling ribbons. Theo clapped his floury hands and cheered. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, filling the cottage with golden light. Lila smiled as she watched him take his first bite, his eyes closing in pure delight. As the boy skipped off to share the treats with his friends, Lila stood by the window, the last spark of magic still glowing faintly on the counter. She sighed softly, knowing that this recipe held more power than she had first imagined. And somewhere beyond the lane, someone was watching and waiting. The oven gave a soft whoosh as Lila slid the tray of pastries inside, the warm glow of the fire casting golden light across the kitchen walls. A hush settled over the room, broken only by the gentle ticking of the clock and the soft bubbling of a pot of honey on the stove. The air already held a sweetness, but now it deepened, becoming richer, thicker, almost like a velvet blanket wrapping around everything it touched. As the minutes passed, a strange and wondrous aroma began to drift from the oven. It wasn't just the scent of butter and sugar, though those were there too. It was something deeper, a fragrance that stirred old memories and hidden feelings. It smelled like a mother's arms after a long day, like warm bread on a winter morning, like laughter spilling across a wooden table. It curled through the cracks in the door and floated out the open window, winding its way into the cool morning air. Lila leaned against the counter, her hands clasped loosely, her heart beating a little faster as she watched the oven. Never before had a recipe filled her kitchen like this. She thought of the mysterious letter, of the strange, shimmering sugar, of the quiet power that had hummed beneath her fingertips as she kneaded the dough. She wondered if she had done something dangerous without realizing it, or if perhaps, just perhaps, she had been chosen for something magical. She spoke softly to herself, barely above a whisper. "Please, let this be a blessing, not a curse, Pip." Her faithful gray cat meowed in response. Rubbing against her leg, as if to comfort her, she reached down, scratching his ears. Her fingers trembling slightly. Outside, the village was beginning to stir. Shopkeepers opening shutters, roosters calling from distant yards, the steady clip-clop of a cart rolling over cobblestones. And then, one by one, the people began to notice. Heads turned as the first tendrils of the enchanted scent curled past doorways and over fences. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Baskets were set down, and eyes widened in surprise. Drawn as if by invisible threads, the villagers began to follow the fragrance. Some with cautious steps, others with eager ones. Mrs. Alder was the first to arrive, clutching her shawl tightly around her shoulders. "Lila, what are you baking this morning?" she called, her voice trembling with both excitement and wonder. Lila smiled warmly, though her heart thudded in her chest. "Just something new," she said softly. "Come and see." Soon the narrow lane outside her bakery was full. Children weaving between skirts and boots. Laughter rising like bright birds into the sky. The door creaked open again and again as neighbors stepped inside, their faces glowing in the golden light. The moment they inhaled the air, their expressions softened, smiles blooming slowly as if they had been carrying burdens that now melted away. Old Mr. Brooke closed his eyes, breathing deeply. "It smells like my childhood," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. A young woman laughed softly, saying, "It feels like home, even though I'm far from mine." Lila's throat tightened as she watched them. tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. She hadn't expected this, hadn't known that a simple pastry could hold such power. She felt a mixture of pride and fear, her heart swelling with joy, even as unease curled quietly beneath it. When at last the oven timer chimed, she pulled the tray out carefully, golden pastries gleaming like tiny treasures, steam rising in delicate curls. The crowd hushed, leaning forward as if witnessing a miracle. Lila placed the tray on the counter and stepped back, letting the villagers draw closer as each person took a bite. The room filled with laughter and gentle sighs. For a moment, it seemed as if the entire village breathed in unison. The worries of the world left at the door. Lila stood by the window, gazing out at the misty lane, and wondered, her heart both light and heavy, what new wonders or dangers tomorrow might bring. The village had grown quiet again, the last of the happy crowd, drifting away with full bellies and warm hearts. Lila stood alone in her kitchen, her apron dusted with flour, her hands resting on the wooden counter. The golden light of evening slanted through the window, catching in the floating motes of sugar and spice that still hung in the air. It was peaceful now, yet beneath that peace a soft whisper of mystery remained, tugging at her thoughts. Her gaze drifted to the folded piece of parchment lying on the shelf, the strange recipe that had started it all. She picked it up slowly, the paper cool and smooth against her fingertips. Sitting down by the window, she unfolded it with care, her heart giving a strange, steady thrum. The handwriting seemed to shimmer in the fading light, those looping, delicate letters almost alive. As she read the recipe again, something caught her eye, a faint mark in the corner she hadn't noticed before. Leaning closer, she saw that it wasn't a smudge or ink blot at all. It was a pattern, almost like the shape of a flower. And when she tilted the page, the lines seemed to form words, hidden between the curves of the recipe's instructions. Lila's breath caught as the secret message revealed itself. Her hands trembled as she traced the letters, and in that moment, her heart recognized the handwriting. It was her mother's. She closed her eyes, a wave of emotion washing over her. Her mother had passed away years ago, yet here, in this letter, her presence felt alive, warm, and comforting, as if she were standing right beside her. A tear slid down Lila's cheek, landing softly on the parchment. "Oh, Mama," she whispered, her voice breaking. The hidden words were simple, but they wrapped around Lila like a loving embrace. "My dearest Lila, this recipe is more than a dish. It is a way to share light when the world feels dark. Whenever you bake, you are not just making food. You are weaving memories and hope into every bite. Do not fear the magic in your hands. It comes from love. And love is the greatest magic of all." Lila's chest ached, but it was a sweet ache, like the first taste of honey after a bitter winter. She thought back to her childhood, standing on a stool beside her mother, watching her knead dough with patient hands, the way her mother would hum softly. The same tune Lila found herself humming every morning now. The realization struck deep. Her mother hadn't just taught her to bake. She had passed down something far greater, a belief that food could heal, connect, and bring joy. This mysterious recipe was not a challenge or a puzzle. It was a gift, a reminder that even though her mother was gone, her love remained, woven into the very fabric of Lila's days. Pip jumped into her lap, curling into a warm ball of fur. Lila stroked him absent-mindedly, her thoughts a swirl of sorrow and gratitude. "Thank you, Mama," she murmured. "I understand now." Outside, the night deepened, the stars beginning to glimmer above the quiet village. Lila folded the letter carefully and pressed it to her heart before setting it back on the shelf. She took a deep breath, feeling both lighter and stronger. The bakery no longer seemed like just a place to work. It was a place where her mother's spirit still lived, where every loaf and pastry carried a piece of that endless love as she blew out the last candle. A soft glow seemed to linger in the room, like a promise. Lila glanced at the covered tray of pastries, a small, knowing smile on her lips. Tomorrow would bring new faces, new stories, and perhaps new secrets. But tonight, she carried her mother's message in her heart, warm and steady, like a flame that would never go out. The evening air was warm and gentle, carrying the faint scent of blossoms from the gardens at the edge of the village. Lanterns swung softly from wooden posts, their golden light spilling across the cobblestone square like pools of sunshine. The hum of conversation was rising, a low, eager murmur that promised something special was about to begin. Lila stood at the center of it all, her arms full of trays stacked high with the magical pastries she had baked that day, their golden crusts glistening under the lantern glow. She had decided only an hour ago to share them with everyone. The idea had come to her suddenly, like a whisper from her mother's letter. These pastries were too full of warmth to keep to herself. She had hurriedly sent Pip trotting off with little ribbons, a playful way of inviting the villagers. Now, as friends and neighbors began to gather, she felt her heart flutter with both excitement and a touch of nervousness. "Come closer, everyone," she called gently, her voice carrying over the square. "There's plenty for all, no charge tonight. Just come and taste." Her words were met with cheers and laughter. Mrs. Alder was the first to arrive, her cheeks rosy as she clasped Lila's hands in greeting. Children darted through the crowd, giggling as they caught the warm, sweet scent drifting from the trays. Even old Mr. Brooke, who rarely left his porch, shuffled forward with a twinkle in his eye. Lila began handing out pastries, one by one. The first bites were met with quiet wonder, then sighs of happiness. The magic in the recipe seemed to work, not only on the tongue but on the heart. Neighbors who had been distant now leaned close to share stories. Laughter rippled through the square like music. Someone began to hum a tune, and soon a fiddler appeared, his bow dancing over strings as if called by the joy itself. As she moved through the crowd, Lila felt something inside her bloom. She watched the faces around her, illuminated by lantern light, and thought of her mother's words. Every smile, every shared laugh was proof that love could be baked into something as simple as a pastry. Her mother had been right all along. The magic was never really in the recipe. It was in the connections it created. "Your hands do wonders, Lila," Mr. Brooks said, his voice rough but kind as he patted her shoulder. "This reminds me of the first winter festival I ever attended long ago. Thank you for bringing that memory back." Lila's eyes stung with tears, but she only smiled, placing another pastry into his hands. The square grew lively as night deepened. Lanterns swayed gently overhead, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across the happy faces below. The mingled scents of cinnamon, butter, and sugar clung to the air, wrapping everyone in cozy sweetness. Lila took a step back, letting herself simply watch, her heart swelling until she thought it might burst. For a brief moment, she imagined her mother standing beside her, smiling proudly at the bustling scene. Lila whispered softly, "We did it, Mama," and in her heart, she felt an answering warmth. As the music played on and laughter rose into the starry night, Lila looked toward her bakery, glowing softly in the distance. She knew that tonight was only the beginning. Tomorrow would bring more baking, more stories, and perhaps more mysteries. But for now, she let the joy of the moment wash over her, like a lantern's glow carried gently on the breeze. Night settled over the village like a soft quilt, stitched with shadows and the glow of lantern light. The laughter from the celebration faded into gentle murmurs as families drifted back to their homes, leaving behind the sweet scent of cinnamon and sugar lingering in the cool air. The cobblestones still warm beneath bare feet as Lila walked slowly toward her bakery, her arms wrapped around herself as she opened the bakery door. A soft hum filled the space, low and tender, like a lullaby sung by unseen voices. Tiny lights flickered in the corners, not from candles or lanterns, but from something far more mysterious. They glimmered and danced in midair, glowing softly like fireflies caught in a dream. Lila stood very still, her breath catching in her throat. It was as if the magic of the recipe had spilled out of her pastries and into the very air. She moved toward the hearth, each step careful, reverent, the old wooden floor creaking beneath her feet. She knelt beside the fire and stirred the glowing embers, the crackle of burning wood blending with the hum. The warmth wrapped around her like a hug. She poured herself a cup of tea, the steam curling upward in pale ribbons, carrying the scent of honey and herbs as she sipped. She thought of the evening's laughter and the glow on her neighbors' faces. Such simple moments, yet so powerful. All this from a handful of flour and sugar, she whispered softly. Shaking her head with a tender smile, her mother's letter lay folded on the table beside her, its edges worn from being read again and again. The magical lights seemed to respond to her words, flickering brighter for a heartbeat before settling into a soft, steady glow. Lila closed her eyes, listening. She felt her mother's presence there, not as a voice, but as a warmth in her heart, a knowing that love had no limits. She thought of how the pastries had brought people together, how neighbors who rarely spoke were now laughing and sharing stories. "This is what you meant, Mama," she murmured, her voice trembling. "The magic isn't only in the baking, it's in the giving. In every shared smile and kind word, a tear slipped down her cheek. Warm against her cool skin outside, the square shimmered softly, lanterns swaying in rhythm with the breeze. Shadows stretched and danced across the cobblestones, as if the night itself was celebrating. Even the stars seemed closer, their light flickering in harmony with the glowing magic inside the bakery. Lila sat quietly by the hearth, Pip curled at her feet, his tiny chest rising and falling in peaceful sleep. She let the stillness settle over her. Sipping her tea slowly, she felt both tired and deeply alive, as though her soul was humming along with the magic that filled the room. The night deepened, the air rich with the scents of smoke, cinnamon and honey. Lila leaned back, her eyes half closed. The last thing she saw before drifting into a gentle doze was the soft dance of magical lights swirling above her, mingling with the glow of the fire, as if promising that this was only the beginning of something wondrous. The kitchen was quiet now, the kind of quiet that comes after a joyful day. The soft crackle of the dying fire mingled with the faint creak of the old wooden beams above. Outside, the village was settling into peaceful sleep, a thin mist curling through the square. Lila moved slowly, her hands gentle as she placed the final pastry on the counter, its golden crust gleaming in the lantern light, the scent of cinnamon and warm sugar still clinging to the air. She stood for a moment, simply breathing it in, the smell of home, of love, of memories both sweet and aching. Her gaze drifted to the folded letter resting on the windowsill, the very one her mother had written so long ago, the edges now soft from being opened and read countless times. With trembling fingers, she picked it up and traced the familiar handwriting. Her heart swelled with gratitude and longing. She could almost hear her mother's voice, warm and steady, guiding her through each recipe, through each step of life. A quiet whisper seemed to float through the kitchen. Not words exactly, but a feeling. Lila smiled softly, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "This will not end here," she whispered, her voice firm yet tender. "I promise, Mama. Your magic will live on." The words felt like a vow, binding her to something greater than herself. She carefully tucked the letter into a small wooden box, along with a copy of the recipe, safe for the day when another pair of loving hands would need it. The night air drifted through the open window, cool and fragrant with the scent of damp earth and distant flowers. She closed her eyes and let it wash over her. Memories of the day playing gently in her mind, the laughter of the villagers, the sparkle in young Theo's eyes, the way everyone had come together as if drawn by an invisible thread. As she tidied the kitchen, she ran her hand along the well-worn counters, each scratch and groove a mark of history, of countless loaves baked and shared. The wood seemed to hum faintly beneath her touch, alive with the warmth of all who had gathered here. Pip gave a small, sleepy yawn from his basket, his tail thumping softly against the floor. Lila knelt beside him, scratching behind his ears. "We did well today, didn't we, Pip?" she murmured. He wagged his tail in answer, his dark eyes shining with trust and contentment when everything was in its place. Lila lit one final lantern and set it in the window, its glow spilling softly into the square. Like a beacon of hope, she imagined travelers passing by, seeing that light and knowing they would find warmth and kindness within these walls. She poured herself a small cup of tea and sat by the hearth, the fire now just a soft bed of glowing embers. Sipping slowly, she let the stillness seep into her bones, her heart calm yet full. She knew the work would never truly be done. There would always be more to bake, more hearts to warm as the night deepened. The kitchen glowed like a treasure chest, filled with quiet magic and love. Lila closed her eyes and whispered one last promise. Always outside, the mist thinned, and the first stars of dawn shimmered faintly, as if the sky itself was smiling, ready to carry the story forward into another day.